Hey guys, the gentleman I have with me today is the epitome of what is a honey badger. He'll tell you all about it in a second. He's invited me on his show several times, so it was only right that I finally reciprocate. Mr. Charlie Kirk, how you doing, sir?
Dr. Saad, you're great. I was going to call you great American, but a great Westerner and fellow fighter for all that is reasonable and good and true and beautiful.
Oh,
So thank you, my friend. Great to be
you're,
back.
you're
Thank you.
too kind. Last week, your book. I'm getting old, so I have to put my glasses. Your latest book with a new publisher, I think, Winning Team Publishing. One of the co-founders is Donald Trump Jr. You have a new book out, Right Wing Revolution: How to Beat the Woke and Save the West. Boy, is this within my wheelhouse. If you'd like, we can either start with the book or maybe first trace for us how, as a 19-year-old, you decided, I'm not going to be parasitized by universities. I'm going to trace my own path forward. We could start there and then finish off with the book. Take it away, sir.
Absolutely. I just want to say your work is amazing, and I'm really enjoying your happiness book. It is terrific.
Oh, thank you.
And so we have to have you back on the show to talk about that. Look, when I was my whole life, I wanted to go to West Point. I grew up in the suburbs of Chicago. I didn't get into West Point, and I was left with a couple options. I could have went to Baylor, a couple other schools, and I wasn't that passionate about it. I've always had an entrepreneurial impulse, you could say. And I told my parents, hey, I'm going to take a gap year to try and save the civilization. And they said, yeah, okay, sure. But they were supportive in the sense where they didn't say I couldn't do it. And it's been 12 gap years since I took that little hiatus. And it's just been this amazing journey. We like to say it's an only in America story. And I think there is a lot of truth to that. Where only in America could a kid who didn't go to college travel the country, convince people to give him some financing, put together an organization, and really help launch a movement that has really captured the country and is making a positive impact against a lot of these things, but also for the ideas of liberty, freedom, self-governance, separation of powers. And yeah, from the very beginning, I saw a problem and I wanted to fix it. I was very underwhelmed by what we would call the conservative infrastructure here in the States. And I felt that it could be a lot more aggressive, that it could be more creative, and also better reaching of young people. And it's just been this remarkable journey, praise God, for the last 12 years, as we have seen this go to high school campuses, college campuses, and now we have a whole political arm. And it just started with, and I talk about this in the book, which was a nice segue, is that everybody can look at a problem and complain about it, but few people can then go about actually solving it. And I'm not necessarily saying we've solved the problem yet, but using your agency, using your action, using your ability to make choices is something that I believe is what is beautiful about being human. And far too often we allow the status quo to govern our reality when we should ask the question, why do we have to live like this? And the answer is we don't. And so Turning Point USA is now a behemoth, and we're super thankful. It's been a great journey.
What do you think it was? I mean, forgive me, I'm asking you to speak about yourself, and I know you're a modest guy, but what is the unique constellation of genes that constitutes your personhood that allows you as a 19-year-old to have, there's a Jewish word, I don't know if you know it, the chutzpah, the hubris,
Oh,
to say,
chutzpah, yeah.
right?
Yes, that's right.
Right. I mean, I'm a 19-year-old. Most 19-year-olds can't find their way to the bus stop, but somehow you decide, you know what? I think I've got the constellation of traits that would allow me. I mean, of course, you could have never predicted that 12 years later you'd be where you are, but yet you still had
Never.
the self-confidence. Is this something that we can bottle and sell, or everyone has to work within their own limited abilities?
So it's a great question. I don't like talking about myself. You are right. You've diagnosed me correctly, but I'll do my best. A couple things. So when I first started Turning Point, I was about a year into it, and I remember I had this eureka moment, and I said, oh my goodness, people don't work as hard as I do. You see, when you're in high school and you're a high performer, you see a lot of people that work very hard for good grades, and that you think that is how the rest of the world works. That high performers, they'll stay up late, they'll do their homework. But when it comes into the professional life or career, all of a sudden you realize that at the top of the success curve, there are very few people, like I was, willing to travel 330 days a year for 10 years straight. And so I traveled 3,000 days for a decade, 3,300 days for a decade. And it's just how I'm wired. I'm relentless. I always made a promise that I will not have the most credentials, but I will outwork you. And I've made good on that promise. And I have a tough time sitting still. I also heard Thomas Massey say this recently, who I just love. And I think I share this genetic deformity with him. I have a genetic deformity where I really don't care what people say about me. I don't know where it comes from. I don't know how to track it. Maybe there's a blood work that could be done. But when people criticize me or call, it doesn't really bother me. And so when people said, "Oh, you're not going to college, you're going to be a failure," it just never fazed me. I will say my parents were always very supportive in the sense where they said, if this is what you believe in, then do it. You know, we'll give you the ability and freedom to do that. But also, to be honest, Dr. Saad, the fact that I was on my own to pay for college was one of the most liberating things. Because of the 2008 financial crisis, my parents were not in a financial place to underwrite college for me. And so I would have had to go into debt, and I was basically on the hook, if you will, to pay for college. It kind of gave me a great bargaining position, gave me leverage.
If you take up a loan, you actually think that you're the one who's supposed to pay it and not the welder and farmer? That's some dangerous talk that you're doing there.
It is very, in fact, it's an old idea and it no longer exists. And so in 2012, I had this idea that if I'm going to borrow $100,000 to go, study something I'm not that passionate about, I'm going to be on the hook for that. Little did I know that the whole idea of the scam is to try to run up the student loan debt as high as possible and fill them with what you would say parasitic ideas, and then have them be government dependent, or at least sympathetic towards government policies and forgiveness programs for the rest of their life. So yeah, and also I guess I'm trying to psychoanalyze myself, is that I always wanted to be the best at whatever I was doing, and it was a relentless pursuit of being excellent, and not everyone has that. And so it was always surrounding myself with the best people, trying to find high performers. And again, when you work really, really hard at something and you find daily disciplines and you stay away from a lot of the riffraff or a lot of what would be the distractions of life, and you really, really emphasize and focus on it. There's a series of studies, as you well know this, Dr. Saad, that intelligence plus self-control, they say those are the top two predictors of quote unquote success. And I think, and there's a great book called Willpower that proves this, and it's a terrific book. And from a young age, I would always pride myself on self-control. I was always that weird kid in high school that, didn't do drugs or wouldn't drink, and always kind of follow a regimented, very rule-based trajectory, which was hilarious when I didn't go to college because it would be seen the opposite. But I think that one of my superpowers is my self-control and my ability to be able to go long periods of time while doing things that otherwise might seem unenjoyable, but then might end up with some fruit or result on the back end.
If I can add, I love your analysis with intelligence and self-control. One thing that correlates with self-control is the trait of immediate versus delayed gratification, right? So in your case, you decided to take one pathway, which was away from education, but yet, as you said, you're still working harder than everyone else. You're not going partying because you're traveling 330 days a year. And therefore, you're delaying this immediate gratification. Hey, I'm a kid. Let me have fun. Let me buy the Camaro or whatever the cool car is today, the Mustang, and because I have to work. Now, in my case, I stayed in university till I was 29 before I finished my PhD. So I am delaying gratification. At any moment, I could have said, well, hey, I just finished an MBA. I could now go out and make $150,000. No, let me delay. So I think I would add to intelligence, self-control, a correlate, which would be delayed gratification. And that, by the way, has huge impact, for example, on your savings pattern, right? So people who score higher on delayed gratification are more likely to save for a rainy day rather than I get the paycheck, I spend it on Thursday, the day that I receive it. So right up your alley.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I would say I'm high in the traits of delayed gratification because a lot of what we work towards at Turning Point is we are trying to build towards something that is years or decades down the horizon.
Right.
And so, again, that is not, I would say in the West, we have become very immediate gratification focused and not delayed gratification focused. It's a huge regression over the last couple of years and decades. And I think it's also one of our problems with our economic condition in the West right now is that we are afraid of any sort of recession or any sort of hiccup economically that we must turn the money printer on immediately and flood the zone with cheap money. But anyway, it's been a remarkable learning experience and journey at Turning Point USA and Turning Point Action. Then we have the podcast and the radio program. I'm an entrepreneur. We have 600 people on staff. We have a
Wow.
great impact every single day, and so and then we write books in the nights and weekends.
I want to do a deep dive into the book in a second, but I just want to say, as a shout out to Turning Point USA, I was fortunate enough to be invited by you to the one that was held in December. I mean, my goodness, that was a rock star operation. I remember, I mean, I've spoken in front of a lot of large crowds, but I've never spoken in front of like a maniacal fervor stadium of, I don't know, 12,000, 15,000 enthusiastic people. It was, I mean, really, it's remarkable for 15 or 20 minutes or however long that talk was. I felt I was the Rolling Stones. I mean, it was unbelievable.
You were Mick Jagger.
I was
Yes,
Mick Jagger,
and,
except I don't get as many girls as him, but yes.
That's right. No, and that's a great example of where we brought a disruptive, I can't stand that word because it sounds so Silicon Valley, but it is the correct term, disruptive, where the previous conservative events were boring and they'd be in like old Hiltons and the AV wasn't spectacular. And I said, okay, for those of us, and again, the word conservative is just a filler term for not woke and decent Americans. So I would always say to our team, if we believe our value system is better than the bad guys, why are our aesthetics so bad? Our aesthetics must also be beautiful and must also be excellent, because we have 5 senses, and it's not just that we're trying to win the argument. We're trying to show a whole of being approach that can have excitement, depth, that can move you on a spiritual level. And we do that at our events. And they're the envy of the entire movement. People are wondering how we do it. And I'll tell you, it didn't start that way. The first event we did was 80 kids in a Holiday Inn Express in West Palm Beach. And I barely was able to pay for it. And we had a slideshow and like 2 speakers, and it was awesome. And I remember I said, just wait, 10 years from now, let's see how those events are. And now they are the biggest, boldest, and most impactful in the country.
Unbelievable. Okay, let's talk. Give us a synopsis, because today unfortunately, have a very busy schedule. So we only have about 30, 40 minutes. So I really want to be able to cover some of the key points in your book. Right-wing revolution. How did you decide to write it? How is it different from other anti-woke books and so on and so forth? Take it away.
Yeah, so the first, we don't spend a lot of time on diagnosing the problem. You've done incredible scholarship on this, and I couldn't compete. We basically, about 10% of the book is saying, what is the woke mind virus? Where does it come from? Nihilism, postmodernism, post-structuralism, deconstructionism, kind of a blend of all that. I will say that the woke is a group of people that complain until they control. It's largely a means of control, of destabilization, and trying to use complaining as a means to an end. However, that's not my lane. That's not my expertise. I'm not a PhD. I'm not a scholar. I know it well enough to be able to converse on it, but it's not my expertise. I am, however, an entrepreneur and an activist, and that's where 90% of the book is emphasized, of what can actually be done on the micro level, be done on the macro level, from building new institutions, from improving your own self, from getting off of social media to, this is the honey badger element in the book, which is caring less about what they call you. That there's a whole chapter on this. And also we talk about how we, as non-woke individuals, we actually have a lot more power than we realize. More political power. We have more economic power. We have more power to be able to counter their advances in society. And the reason we do not do it is not because of our numbers, but it's because we lack the will. And that is where I spend a lot of time examining why we have allowed these parasitic ideas, this virus, this civilizational bacterial rot to continue. And I really believe that it's because we Westerners have prioritized comfort and the ease of the modern life over the necessity of conserving what is good, true, and beautiful. And then a lot of the book is about my own personal story of what I have personally done, and challenging the audience, asking them to get off the couch, stop complaining, and to go do something actively in this culture war. And that's the number one question I receive from people. And that's why I wrote the book. One thing else is that people are struggling. Well, what do I do? What do I do? I totally agree. I know that the woke are bad, but what do I actually do? And so there's a call to action of, we need to go found 100 new colleges in the next 5 years in America. We have to figure it out. And they have to be like in the University of Austin Hillsdale model. We have to defund these major institutions from a taxpayer level. And we go about the actual lawmakers that are resisting it, the places and the states, for example, Oklahoma, Missouri, Kansas. We have a whole battle plan in the book of how that can happen legislatively. So I'm just touching the surface on this, Dr. Saad, but I felt my service to the anti-woke resistance, if you will, was much more in the activism and in the entrepreneurial space than just criticizing where do these ideas come from. Because I believe that scholarship has been done thoroughly. Obviously, you played a big role in that. The action is where we've really been lacking.
Oh, that's fantastic. Because by the way, I also receive oftentimes this kind of helpless sense. I agree with you 100%, but I'm just a little guy. I'm a bus driver. I'm a this, I'm a that. So there's always some sense of helplessness as to how, given the fact that I'm a small guy, I don't have Joe Rogan's platform. I'm not an entrepreneur like Charlie Kirk. I'm not some fancy professor. What can I do? And so I think you're really filling a really important niche by giving people a set of recipes, prescriptions to empower them. So that's fantastic. If we can, anything else you want to add about the book, or can we move to a few other?
No, it's great. Let's move on to other stuff. That's fine. It's great.
Okay, but please, folks, Right Wing Revolution, get it. It's a good one. I haven't read it yet. I just read first couple of pages. It's gripping. You really want to get it. Okay. Tonight we've got a little boxing match going on between an avocado brain and a rather energetic guy. One is called Biden, the other is called Trump. Care to give us any of your astute predictions, Mr. Kirk?
Well, and everyone knows my biases. I'm very close to President Trump, and he's a friend, and he's been very good to me throughout the years. He's been a big part of my success. Predictions, boy, that's difficult to say. I think that Joe Biden will surprise some people. He's had 10 days to rest, and I will say this, Dr. Saad, that if he gets through all 90 minutes of this debate, it'll be one of the greatest accomplishments in American chemistry in the modern era. I want to know the recipe. I want to meet the man, and he deserves a prize.
Oh, man. Implying that women are not smart enough to be in science. I'm going to tape that and run it throughout all my social media, racist, sexist.
You should. And I will retweet it, and I will say that is correct. The man or woman, Dr. Saad, or wait, hold on, there's more than that.
Exactly. Thank you.
Right. Okay. We must police our own speech. That puts that chemical cocktail together. I do find it fascinating, and I want to make sure we emphasize the framework. In America, having a debate this early is unheard of. Usually debates are in the fall. To have a summer debate is really unprecedented. It has not happened in the modern era. Donald Trump did what Donald Trump does. He put out on social media, I will debate Joe Biden anytime, any place. Not thinking Joe Biden would actually call the bluff. Joe Biden has seen some very negative poll numbers in the last couple of months. The conviction of Donald Trump, which is ridiculous, and it is sinister, and it is unprecedented, and it is evil. We should not be locking up former presidents, let alone opposition political leaders, on made-up crimes right before an election. It is direct election interference. His poll numbers went up after that, believe it or not, in certain states. So therefore, Joe Biden, out of an act of desperation, he is looking at tonight as a way to try and tighten the race and get it within the margin of error. My advice to President Trump, both publicly and privately, is a tie is a win here. You're already doing very, very well in the polls. They're going to try to create you into a caricature that is not who you really are, which is that you're going to be interrupting or that you won't be stable or balanced. And I think Joe Biden has a lot more to lose than Donald Trump. Donald Trump, I think, will surprise a lot of people in his ability to navigate both the adversarial moderators and also some of the back and forth with Joe Biden. But I anticipate Joe Biden to be able to get through the debate. I anticipate him to be able to, somewhat answer questions. He has decayed greatly in recent years. President Trump will be at his best if he is able to emphasize the obvious. But the first time since 1892, we have two independent presidential terms back to back that we are able to judge. In the 1892 presidential election, it was Benjamin Harrison v. Grover Cleveland. Grover Cleveland won the 1884 presidential election. He was displaced from power in 1888 when Benjamin Harrison won. He ran for president again and ended up winning, the only president to serve non-consecutive terms here in the States. I believe President Trump will do the same in the sense, well, hopefully he'll win. I'm not guaranteeing anything, but that is the sort of message saying, hey, look how good things were. Look how bad they've become. and now look at the path forward. And finally, I believe that if President Trump, my advice to him is reminding swing voters and independent voters how Joe Biden has embraced the worst elements of what you and I would call the woke, Dr. Saad, but this radical, anti-reality, anti-truth agenda that is now running the federal government. I think it is very persuasive for people in the middle.
Wow. Sticking on the issue of Trump versus Biden, I opened up a recent talk that I delivered in Toronto with the following stats. 2020, among the American Jewish vote, it was 68-30 for Biden. So it was a 38-point differential among American Jews for Biden. Poll that just came out of, a couple of weeks ago showed it 61-23 for Biden. So the exact same 38-point difference. The numbers have changed, but the difference is the exact same. Now, the reason why I'm saying this is the delta. The reason I'm saying this is because someone recently asked me on their show, in my 30-plus year career as a professor and a behavioral scientist, what is the singular human phenomena that has most surprised me? And my answer was the inability of people to change their minds in light of incoming evidence that suggests that they should perhaps change their minds. And here you've got 68-30. Then 4 years happen. This thing called October 7th happened. This thing of orgiastic Jew hatred happens, which he's certainly facilitating, he meaning Biden. And yet it didn't move the needle by 1% amongst American Jews. Now, the good news is that the Latino vote has moved. The Black vote has moved. But do you have any insight as to why it's, and I say this as a Jewish person, why it is that somehow the American Jews are impervious of any incoming information?
Yes, and I say this, and I want to be very clear. I'm very pro-Israel and very pro-Jewish. So when I say this, it's not a criticism, but most American Jews take social justice more seriously than their religion, and their religion has become social justice. And that is a fact. So the more liberal you are in your Judaism, or the less seriously you take your Judaism, the far more likely you are to be attached to the Democrat Party no matter what. And then the more seriously you take your Judaism, Orthodox Judaism, for example, the more likely you are to support Donald Trump. It is remarkable how ingrained this is. And this is one of the reasons why you see the recurring Donald Trump is a fascist, the right wing is full of fascists, is that many Jewish Americans, they want nothing to do with the quote unquote fascist party or anything close to that. There is this serious problem, though, that must be dealt with, that some of the most destructive worldviews, this is Dennis Prager who said this, by the way, who's a committed Jew and a great man. He said some of the most destructive worldviews that have been introduced into the West, from Marxism to parts of nihilism, deconstruction, were almost always from Jewish intellectuals or Jewish philosophers, because there has been this yearning in Jewish circles to try and improve the world by all means necessary, and that means through the state. And so it is really remarkable to see, though, after the slaughter of 1,000 plus Israelis, to see the campus protests, to see how it's open hunting season against American Jews, how so many liberal Jews still will say, I am more serious about my liberalism than my Judaism. That's the best explanation I can give.
No, that's very good. And by the way, there's nothing wrong in you saying that certainly some of the, I mean, I'm the first to say it, that of course, all the parasitic ideas coming from university campuses, and certainly Jews have been quite dominant within academia. So the fact that many of these idiotic ideas come from Jewish individuals is incontestable. Here's where the problem comes in, and I would so want to know from you, because I think you're in touch with some of these folks, how we can get them to change their opinions. So I will post something that, for example, demonstrates that when it comes to the persecution of Christians, Islam is overwhelmingly the greatest danger to Christian life throughout the world, let alone in the Middle East and so on. And then I'll always get some Christian I don't know how right wing they are, but they seem quite sort of the Jews won't replace us, that will always shift the blame away from the guy who's coming to behead you and ultimately blame it on the Jew. So, for example, if I show that the grooming gangs in Britain, here's the name of the guys that were just caught in some town, and every single one of them has the name Muhammad, then not someone, 1,000 people will descend on my social media and say, well, that's not because of Islam. It's because it's the Jews who were promulgating the idea of open door policies. So when 3 Muhammads gang raped your daughter, it's really Moshe that's to blame. Now, that's not coming from Islamic guys. That's coming from, from right-wing Christian guys. So then you almost feel helpless, because rather than that guy saying, hey, let's band together and fight a common enemy, they turn to me and say, but you're the problem. You're the Jew. It's all because of you. Is there any way to reach those guys, or do we just assume that they are irretrievable?
I think there is a way to reach them, and I don't think they're a majority of the Western conservative movement by any means. Most conservatives are very pro-Israel and are very pro-Jewish life. And so, but I think where they come from is they believe and they conflate liberalism with Judaism, right, which is not the same thing. And just kind of going back to the previous answer, that there are a lot of liberal Jews, but Judaism itself is not necessarily liberal. And so they'll say, all these problems are the Jews' fault. I'll be honest, that is incredibly sloppy intellectual thinking. If you are just going to blame a group of people that are not necessarily always involved at all in this situation, then how does that exactly work? And then, by the way, help me understand, in the United Kingdom, who exactly was the one doing the open door policy? I mean, I think that it was actually mostly like secular former Episcopalians that were doing the open door policy, not quote unquote Jews. So it is tempting but evil to blame a small group for the suffering of society, and it is a cop-out just to say, quote unquote, it's the Jews' fault.
Right. No, I hear you. And by the way, let's take, for example, immigration. Well, Stephen Miller in the United States is arguably the biggest anti-immigrant. Right, he's Jewish. Gad Saad, Canadian Jew, is not for open door policy and open immigration policy. But what they'll say is, oh, but George Soros is the acolyte of Karl Popper, who started the movement of the open society. They're both Jewish, and therefore, so they look for the Jew who supports the ideology, but never look at the Jew who fights against the ideology. So it's a perfect manifestation of selective processing to support my innate bigotry.
Yeah, so instead of focusing on what tribe or ethnic group, let's focus on values and publicly stated beliefs. So that's why the Islamic example is actually good, because there are publicly stated beliefs and actions that are an existential threat to the West, right? And that is 100% a problem. And then the same with the woke. And so, look, I think that's actually one of the criticisms we give of the woke, isn't it? That they just want to view the world through a tribal group lens. And so we, on our side, Team Reality, need to resist that same temptation on our side.
Well, exactly. Listen, I probably have more shared values with you than I may have with an Oberlin ultra progressive Jew. I may have more in common with Imam Tawhidi, who's a good friend of mine, who's a Islamic imam, than I may have with an Orthodox Jew. I judge people, as you said, by the constellation of their character, their values, and so on. So right on. Okay, we have only a couple of minutes left, and then I regrettably have to let you go to honor your schedule. What are some projects right now we're promoting? I get it, right-wing revolution. Are there some other big projects that you want to take this opportunity to tell our audience about? Take it away.
Yeah, here in the States, we're working on what's called the ballot chasing operation. We believe that the American Democrat Party, they have invested more money, time, and focus on the process of elections than just on who wins the policy debate. So our project, which is a serious project, tens of millions of dollars, is about hiring hundreds of full-time people to engage in that process of ballot chasing, ballot harvesting where legal, and registering voters. In the United States, it is a totally disorganized mess of how we do our elections. It varies state by state and county by county. And the Democrats have a leviathan of a multi-billion-dollar infrastructure. So we're working on that. It's tpaction.com. I will be doing my most ambitious campus tour ever this fall. I will be going to nearly 20 campuses across the country in like 30 days. So it's all across the country. People can see the live streams. They can watch the clips. And also our podcast is doing very, very well, and it's growing. We do our radio program. I'm sure I have other projects in addition to that, but those are the ones that just kind of come to mind.
Unbelievable. Keep doing your incredible work. I can't wait to one day see you. Is it a chance that you could be in politics? Am I going to someday be calling you president?
I mean,
Kirk, something?
I hope not. I'm very happy. I'm very grateful for what I have. And I rarely meet a happy politician, rarely. So,
well, I'll tell you what, though.
Forgive
me for interrupting you. In addition to having all of the talents that you have, you're tall. I'm not. I could never be prime minister or president because, unfortunately, God did not endow me with height. He endowed me with other qualities, but I don't have the height. You've got all those other things, and you're massively tall. I see the White House in your future.
I have no plans to do that, but Dr. Saad, if that happens, you could be a senior advisor. So
oh,
the deal
my
is
goodness.
done.
He said it, people. He's got to live up to it. Otherwise, he is a shady politician. Charlie Kirk, what a pleasure to have you. Stay on the line so we could say goodbye offline. Thank you so much. A real pleasure talking to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers.
You bet.